Hello and welcome to project number 2. The title of this project is Color Palette. So the idea of this project starts with a vague statement that either you come up with or somebody tells you about. So the vague statement here is develop an app that enables the user to construct a color. The user should use the color to paint on the second view. And as you will see, there are two types of demonstration of that painting on the second view. This is the beginning. I want to do something where we can make a color and use it to paint. So how can we start? How do we think about that? I want to introduce you to the app development process and encourage you to think through the app development in this way. And many times I find people hesitate to follow a specific process. In fact, you do follow a process, whether you like it or you think about it consciously or not, you follow it in your head. What I am suggesting to you here is to try to adapt these steps, even if you do it in your head. And if the problem is big enough, try to write it down as I am disciplining myself in these videos to do. Some of these may be very simple and you can contain it in your mind without really writing it. But in many of the real life apps that you will be developing, it will be more complex. And unless you get in the habit and the discipline of writing it down, things can become overwhelming and difficult and inefficient to develop. So in following the app development process, there are 3 steps. Step number 1 is problem formulation. Step number 2, solution formulation. Step number 3, solution implementation. And I put it all in this slide. In step number 1, we focus on 3 areas. First, researching. And you research here what similar apps like the one you're trying to develop look like, what do they do, what functionality they have. You can also research some concepts that may be new to you. For instance, in this case, we're saying we want to construct a color. So this might be a new concept to you. You don't know how to even define a digital color. You can spend some time researching that, and the first step of research is go to Google and ask or search for digital color or how to construct digital color or what is a digital color, and you will find many articles that speaks to the color components and different ways to construct digital color. So research can be research about the problem, some concepts in the problem that are new to you. It could be about what's in the market, so different things in here. Then the scope. After you do that research, the scope is what you're actually going to do. Very specific statement of what your app is intended to do. And then testing is essential. If you know what the app needs to do, you should be able to determine how you will test it. Now, this happens before you even create the app. And this happens at your level as the owner of the problem or the owner of the app. You want to know how to test it so that whether you're going to develop or give it to somebody else to develop it, without knowing how you can confirm that the app accomplished the scope, whether doing what exactly the scope did, and also accommodating any other possible alternatives or errors or things that the user can do. So testing is very important, and in this step you highlight what we call testing scenarios or define testing scenarios for the app. The second step, now that you define the problem, then you go to defining the solution. We are following in this course the model view controller design pattern. This is a sequence of steps to think about creating the solution, the app solution to the problem. The model represents the data, the view represents the user interface, the controller represents the actual instructions that the computing device or your phone or your tablet will do. So the model, you ask 2 questions. What data the app needs to maintain or to need to retrieve, import or export, what data the app deals with, and how to represent this data in the app universe, the phone, which is the memory of your device. The app works with the memory of your device. When you buy your phone, there's like 16 gigabytes, 64 gigabytes, 32. That describes the capacity of the memory of the device. When you run your app or load your app, it loads into the memory and it has to represent all the data in the memory. Think about mailboxes. Every section in memory is like a mailbox. It has a number. In our case, it has a name and it has content in it. Every memory contains one type, one variable, and so on and so forth. So we need to know what type we're gonna represent it. The types of the data are usually defined in the platform. So we're working with the iOS platform, and it has many different types to represent different data. And you also have the ability to create your own type. You'll see in project number 5, we will be creating our own type. Until then, we will be using what types that are in the library. Then the view, and the view has two parts. First, what the user will see, how to present the app data to the user in a way that is intriguing for the user, that's helpful, that's efficient, that enables the user to do the job that they need to do, and also what components the user will use to interact with the app. Remember, the user interface is where the user tells the app what they want, whether they want to give the app some data, whether they want to trigger the app to execute some functions. So there's a user-generated event. So what kinds of interaction you want the user to do with the app. The controller then takes those actions or those timing when the events that takes place, whether it's user events like clicking on a button or touching the screen or something, or it's a built-in event like loading the app, transitioning from one screen to the other, and so on. So there are events that are generated within the app. Some of it the app generates internally through the operating system, so through the definition, so we call it internal events, and there are ones that the user generates and so on. So we have to define when do we want the app to execute its function, and then what functions the app actually need to do. And in the controller, which takes the form of a software module called the class, we define functions to respond to each one of those events, as we did in project 1. Then finally, the third step is to implement that solution. This is the project management step. Not really the project management. What we did here is part of the project management LLC, but this is the project plan. So we follow here something called iterative development. Iterative development means that you take your project, break it down into smaller projects, a smaller complete project. By complete, I mean after each project, sub-project, or after each iteration, the app is functioning, the app is working, but it is not doing everything, it's just doing a smaller part. But with the addition of all those iterations, you finally reach the scope. This is a beautiful way to start from what you know, and to start and to get a prototype, get an app up and running quickly, and then add incremental increases to the abilities of your app. So that's the app development process, and you'll see now we're applying it on this problem. So problem formulation. So we have a problem, and again, the problem is develop an app that enables the user to construct a color and then use the color to paint on a second screen. So similar to the previous project, spend some time on the iTunes store to search for similar apps. And if you're not familiar with digital color, go ahead and Google digital color and see what can be done. I will not do that. I did it in previous projects, so you can go spend that time on your own and then come back, continue the videos. The scope for the project, and the scope here will differ. So this is the scope that I am going to follow. You may choose to follow exactly that scope, or maybe you can alter the scope a little bit. If you are a beginner, I would advise that you follow me strictly, and you will see towards the end, like we did in project 1, I tell you now that you finished this as an example, go back and try to implement your own. In the testing, so here the scope, the app will construct a color using red, green, and blue. And then in the scope, red, green, blue, and alpha. So I learned from the digital color that you can construct a digital color if you know the component of the color or the contribution of each part of the color. And here there is, you can construct a color by knowing the red component, the green component, the blue component, and the alpha component. You can enter those components using a decimal number, as we will see later. Then once you constructed a color, and that's like in the memory of the app should display that color to the user so they see what they created. And then we want to create another screen and display the color on the second screen as well, or use it to paint. So testing, I could construct several testing scenarios here, but just to give you an example, scenario one is to construct a red color and observe that there's a red color, meaning that give the value of red. Then yellow is a mix of colors, red and green, and then another scenario is to open a new screen and use the color to paint. So now that we define the problem, then solution formulation, we start with the model. So what data the app will need and how to represent it. The data you can start from your scope statement or problem statement. Every noun that you define in your problem statement is a candidate to be data. So if we look at our statement, we have the app, but that's like a whole our project. So we have color, red, green, blue, alpha components. And if you go, there is a user, and if you want to create another user, there's also a view. So these are all potential data. I'm not gonna do a multi-user, so I will not use the user here, but here's a list of the data and the type that we can represent the data. So the red value or the red component, the green component, the blue component, alpha component, and the color object. And from the types, since these are numbers, and I learned that from my search on digital color, these are numbers between 0 and 1, so I can represent it with this new type called the float. This is the first time we get exposed to this type in the iOS, and that's a type that represents decimal numbers between any decimal number. We actually learned in project 1 about the type that represent non-decimal numbers called integer. So that is the float. So all four components will have the type float. Also, we have the color type, which will be a UI color, which is a library component as well. And this is a new library component, library type. So going through the documentation, you may learn a little bit about what that type, and we'll do that when we do the project setup and later on. Then you move to the view, what the user will see and what to interact with. So we need, the user in this project need to give us some input. So we need to find a component where the user can give us some data, tell us what they wanted it to be. Since I know limits, so I know that the red color has to be between 0, which means no red component, to 1, which means full red component. There is a component, a user interface type called UI slider that basically provides a slider between two limits. So this is a perfect user interface component to provide the user to use for giving us some the data they want. We also need a component to display the color to the user. In this case, I'm gonna add another component of the type UI view, and you will see that a UI view is basically a rectangle area that you can use for what you want. The screen already comes with a view. It's built in that provides the area of the screen on your phone. That is a view. So I can use that, or I can add another one. I choose here to add another one. We need another screen, so we're going to use the type UI view controller to add a controller. The screen from Xcode or the UI view controller comes automatically with a built-in view, because the controller is virtual. You don't really see it. It's the view, the rectangle area that the user sees. So UI view controller is a type that comes with a built-in view. In the controller, you describe what the app should do and when the app will do it. So the app will need to figure out what numbers or that values for the different color components the user want to use, and display the color to the user. The app or controller also need to manage the transition from one screen to the other and the sharing of the color value between the two screens. And then we need to manage the either the display of the new color on the second screen or painting on the second screen. When the app should do that, we have multiple events. We have built-in events when the view loads. We have when the screen transitions from one to the other. We call this the segue transition. And when the user makes a selection of a value, so we'll do that. And finally, if we do the painting, when the user touches the screen. I want to say something here that at this point, which is our first iteration, you may not know all of this. In the first iteration, the reason it is iterative, it's really dependent on you. So some of us may know a lot, so you will actually provide a lot of details at this first iteration. Some of us are beginners, so you don't know much. The idea of iterative is you start from what you know. So you have to understand that what you see in front of you is not a right or wrong answer. This is a design process. So this is based on my own knowledge. When you do this, it will be based on your own knowledge. So it may not look exactly like that. It may be much less because you're a beginner, maybe a lot more if you're more advanced than me, or you may actually come with what I came up with, but express it in different ways. Then finally, the solution implementation, and here you create an iteration plan. So as you can see, I created 7 iterations, meaning I broke down this problem into 7 sub-problems. The first one is what we're working on right now, called the planning and the project setup, where we go to Xcode and actually build the project. And these next ones is I said, let's first construct the color with one component. So I chose the red because you construct the color with 4 components. Instead of working through all the 4 components at one time, I say let's take one of them at a time. So I'll start with the red, and if I do that correctly, then I add the green. If I do the red and the green, then you see in iteration 4, I said let's do the blue and alpha together. Then I broke the transition to the second screen into 2. First, let's learn how to do the navigation. Then once we do the navigation, let's transition the data between the two screens. And then finally, the last iteration is to paint on the new screen, use the data in the second screen to do something useful. So that's the end of iteration number 1. So now we have some initial steps to go and some action items to do to go and set up the Xcode project, and we'll do that in the next video.